lives, to our own minds, the various storms that we encounter as we navigate life, and how beneath the surface of that mind, or beyond that mind, there is within each of us this vast ocean of peace that we hear Gurudev talk about and embody. Right? This kind of healing silence that's within us, that's accessible to us, right? That can inform us or offer us this beautiful light and wisdom that can guide us. We all probably have some sense of that, some taste of that. Probably everyone, whether they're on the spiritual path or not, has some taste of this kind of internal peace that's not dependent on things outside. Gurudev sometimes talks about this when he talks about the fulfillment of desire. And I'm reminded of this example that Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk, gives. The experience of the non-toothache. Do you know this experience? Some of you have heard it talked about. Imagine, right, to talk about it you have to imagine the experience of having the toothache. Right, that kind of gnawing pain that's relentlessly there no matter what you're doing. It's there all the time. Right? You could substitute headache, any kind of pain like that. That's so intense that you can't escape it. And you find yourself desperate for getting rid of that pain, longing for that more than anything else. If you could just be free of that pain. Can you envision that situation? Remember a moment like that? And then you have to think about this, because it's hard to remember this part. Can you remember that instant when the pain finally dissolved away and was gone? Can you think of what that feels like? Thich Nhat Hanh actually called it the bliss of the non-toothache. Kind of the shame of it is, how long does that bliss last? Just a few seconds. Because then the mind begins to think of the next thing that it needs or wants. Somehow we're unable to stay in that moment, right? That space in between desires, right? When there is no desire. Even though it's so delicious to be there. Gurudev beautifully talked about this approach, this devotional approach of surrender to God. In our stress management teacher training, we're actually looking at how we can introduce all the different aspects of yoga philosophy in a way that's accessible to people in many different situations, in hospitals, in schools, in corporate settings, even in prison, military settings. How can we make these principles of yoga philosophy adapted enough? We call it reframing those principles to make them accessible. And we talk about the kind of four classic paths in yoga. Right? One of them being bhakti yoga, like the path of devotion or surrender. And certainly, it's interesting to touch on the other paths and then to see how they all ultimately intersect. And I want to touch on those four paths just briefly.